Welcome to Sunday School at Cornerstone Baptist. We are in number 5 in our Biblical Foundations for the Family. We're about 12 weeks in, 11 weeks in, but this is topic number 5, conflict resolution in marriage. And these carries over into your other relationships at work and in your neighborhood. There's a lot that we can learn relating to our family relationships, especially our marriages. Matthew 18:7. Matthew 18 talks about forgiveness. It talks about what we call church discipline of trying to restore somebody who has wandered away, and we're trying to bring them back into a productive relationship. But earlier in that chapter, Matthew 18:7 says it is inevitable that stumbling blocks will come, but woe to that man through whom the stumbling blocks comes. In other words, we don't want to be the person who causes another believer to trip up. Let's face it, sin is guaranteed. It will come. We each are sinners, saved sinners if we've trusted Christ, but we still find day after day that we fall into sin. And that creates conflict. It creates conflict in our families, with our neighbors, with our spouses. Conflict comes. But we want to encourage each other this morning that God's Word actually solves these problems for us, or at least it gives us a roadmap to solving these problems. We want to be encouraged that. On the one hand, we'd love to prevent the conflicts to begin with. And that helps to think through and carefully communicate with each other. Have you ever had a disagreement with your spouse because you said something that you really hadn't thought through clearly, so you didn't communicate clearly? So they took it the wrong way because you didn't communicate the right way, you didn't communicate clearly, and now we have a conflict when it could have been prevented by just backing up a little bit. Sometimes conflicts come because we don't listen very well. So somebody has a clear statement that they want to communicate. We don't listen, and now there's conflict. So there's all sorts of different things that can cause conflict. But then how do you respond to conflict in a biblical way? And that's more of what this topic, number 5, is going to be about, is about solving conflicts. We're not specifically dealing with the peacemaker, and again, quote unquote, peacemaker material here in these sessions. But next week I'll have some of that available for you, where there was a man, Ken Sandy, who was a lawyer, and he was helping people get divorced. And he started thinking, wait a minute, maybe I should be helping people to stay together. So he started thinking through that and working his way through the Bible principles. And he developed a ministry of peacemaking, of how to go about solving problems. And a lot of these solutions that we'll see in the Bible today and then next week would be in peacemaker material too. But I'll have that map laid out for you next week. But one of the things Ken Sandy says is that conflict can make life very awkward. It often catches us off guard. It leads us to say or do things we later regret. When someone offends us, we can react without thinking. Soon it's as if we're sliding down a slippery slope with things going from bad to worse. Have you ever responded to something trying to solve a problem and you just made the problem worse? Of course you have. We're prone to that. And we're trying to figure out how to stay. If you want to make an arch, say, and we want to stay up here on the top of the arch and live godly lives and resolve conflicts and work together, but you start working one way where you're attacking the other person, you start moving the other way where you just ignore it, you run away from it. Both sides lead to a sliding down the slippery slope, and we don't want to do that. Roman numeral number 1, we're just talking about introductory ideas under Roman numeral number 1. It's just kind of thinking through this. And in Matthew chapter 7, first 5 verses talks about us looking at our side of the problem first, Matthew 7 says, "Do not judge lest you be judged." Well, people love to quote that without really knowing what the passage says, because once you find out what the passage says, it is saying you have to judge. You're just saying you have to judge carefully and judge in the way that you want to be judged yourself. And that comes out after this whole section that we're reading, where it talks about not casting your pearls before swine. Well, you have to judge who the swine are, so we have to make judgments. But it's saying be careful. The very next part of verse 1 says, "For in the way you judge, you will be judged." So it's how we judge, not don't judge at all. "And by the standard of measure, it will be measured to you. And why do you look at the speck that is in your brother's eye and do not notice the log that is in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye'? Behold, the log is in your own eye. You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye." So 7, 1 through 5, put that in your own words. So I'll just wait and think about it. What does that mean?
Look in the mirror before you judge someone else. Take a hard look at yourself first.
Good. Look in the mirror first before you go barging into somebody else's life trying to solve something. Yes.
Oftentimes when I'm judging someone else for, if I take that moment and think I'm doing the exact same thing.
Okay.
So sometimes I see it in other people quicker than I do.
Good. So sometimes we're accusing the other people of doing what we're doing. And it's easy to see in somebody else, but not easy to see in ourselves. Good. Yeah.
Plus the log in your own eye, you're obviously not seeing clearly. So you have something in your own eye.
So there's something here that's making me not see clearly. I need to make sure I see clearly before I go and try to solve this thing with somebody else. Where's the log?
In my eye.
Isn't that interesting? The log is always in my eye. The speck is always in their eye. That isn't necessarily, how do I say it, the end of the matter or the reality of the matter, but the way I have to see things, the way I have to see conflict is the log is always in my eye, and I need to get this out of here so that I can see clearly. So look at your side of the problem first. That would be another way to put this, or another aspect of this. You know, look in the mirrors. How have I contributed to this? How am I not seeing this clearly? What is there that I might be doing? We want to help somebody else, but we must remove whatever is in our eye first. That's the priority, both in importance in solving this conflict and in time. So in the time, in the timeline of it, I do this first. How will looking at your part of the problem help the other person? So I have this problem with the other person, a conflict. How will taking care of my problem help the other person? I know it's early. Randy.
It seems like if you go through the analysis of, self-assessment on that problem, or just to make sure there's no sin in your life at that particular time, that it would slow your thinking down a little bit to try to understand where that person's sin is coming from. For use alcohol, for example, why is that person indulging in alcohol? There's something missing. And then once you can identify that, it might help you.
Okay. So the pause of just slowing down a little bit. Nathan and I were able to ride together to Mom's, then to the conference, and then home. And if you go 75, you're getting run over by everybody on the interstates. And a lot of things happen really quickly at 75. And you can miss road signs very quickly. And if you just slow down a little in problem solving, and you get to understand the other person better. Why is it that they might have done what they did? Anyone else? How can we help the other person? Or how does this help the other person? Yeah.
Does it help in the fact that I've humbled myself before the Lord? I'm going to go to them humble, and hopefully they'll see my humble heart, that it's not out to choke them or...
So there's two sides really of what Betsy's saying. If I humble myself before the Lord and say, Lord, here's how I've maybe contributed, or even, Lord, I don't know how I contributed, please show me. That's going to change my whole attitude going into this process. So that's one side of it. And I probably won't be as harsh. I probably won't be as distorted in my thought process, in my vision. But then the other side of it is they will see that I really care and that I really want to solve this, that I'm not coming into it arrogantly. So there's two sides of humbling ourselves as we come into this conflict. They will see that you're trying to meet them in the middle somewhere. That look, here's what I've observed in my life, and here's how I've changed. Here's what I'm observing in your life. And they say, oh, okay, so they've recognized this, and they understand that we're reasonable in this. Number 3 question, what are some possible conclusions a person may draw when he looks at his part of the problem first? I know we've talked about this a little. Some of you hinted at it. But if I look in the mirror first, what conclusion might I come to? Yeah.
Maybe your problem was more so than their problem.
Yeah. Wow. Looks like I was on the lower side of the teeter-totter, and I contributed a lot more than they did. Yeah, good.
It might seem a little cliche now for those of us that have been Christians for a while, but the old 1 Corinthians 15, love is patient, love is kind, putting your name in the place of love.
Yeah.
Was I patient? Was I
Right.
kind?
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Using your name in the Bible commands about relationships, especially about love. Was I being loving? Am I being loving in this situation? And you might come to the conclusion, I guess I'm a pretty filthy, rotten sinner, just the same as anybody is. So yeah, it really helps you to see maybe the other person wasn't as bad as I was making them out to be in this situation. Okay, so that was letter A. Look at your part of the problem first. This is all introductory, really. Letter B is be sure your goal in the conflict is the same as your goal in life. Your goal in the problem, make sure it's the same as your goal in life. What is your goal in life? We do talk about writing a life purpose statement, and it sounds really frightening and you don't know just where to start. But there are several passages that give us hints. 2 Corinthians 5:9 is one, therefore we have as our ambition, whether at home or absent, to be pleasing to him. We want to please God with our life. Another one you may go to is 1 Corinthians 10:31, about whether you eat or drink or whatever you do all to the glory of God. So you're wanting to reflect God and God's beauty and God's glory and God's love. So there's several different ways that you could look at that. But really the goal of life, according to 2 Corinthians 5:9, is to please God. And then Romans 8:28 and 29 narrow that definition of pleasing God down. We like Romans 8:28, where it talks about, all things work together for good to those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. And 29 talks about what that purpose is. For whom he foreknew, he also predestinated to become conformed to the image of his Son. So God is doing all things to try to make us look more like Christ. God just decided he wants us to be like Christ, and all things are to work toward that purpose, even this conflict I'm in. So what is your purpose in this conflict? I'll show them who's right. That's often what our purpose is. Or, I'm going to win this battle. Now, there are times when as a parent we say, no, child, I'm the parent. I'm going to win this battle. But you can still have the goal of being pleasing to God during that conflict. So then the question for us to interact with lists things a person might say, do, or think during a conflict that would be inconsistent with the goal of pleasing God by being like Jesus. In other words, what are some ways in a conflict that we might not be like Jesus? And just list them so that we have them out on the table.
Degrading somebody.
Okay, so putting somebody down, degrading them, good.
Losing your temper.
You lose your temper. You're just out of control.
Point to all the past mistakes.
Now, look at what you did then, and then. It's not even contributing to the present solution. You're just pointing out the past mistakes.
Say always, you always do.
Okay, so making extreme statements or blanket statements. You never take out the garbage. Well, I did once. You always, well, I didn't one time. Make sure you're being honest. Okay.
Silent.
Yeah. The communication skills that we had been through in the last few weeks about either attacking them verbally or turning the cold shoulder to them and just communicating that we're not even caring about them and solving this problem. There's our attitudes of pride and the belittling in degrading them is really growing out of pride. Sometimes you can even get physical in your responses, where you're pushing and shoving and hitting and breaking things. So there's a lot that we might do in a conflict that would not reflect Christ. Letter C, place a great value on restoring a relationship when conflicts occur. In today's world, in today's cancel culture, it's even more so than a few years ago when I wrote this material. I'm just going to get rid of them. If I don't like what you just said on a social media group, I'm just going to leave the group, or I'll kick you out of the group. I'll cancel you. But make sure that your value in restoring a relationship. Galatians 6:1 says, "Brethren, if a man is caught in any trespass, in a fault, in a ditch, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in the spirit of gentleness or meekness, considering yourself, lest you too be tempted." That word restore is used of setting a broken bone. When you break a bone, you want to restore it so that it will be profitable again. And when you see somebody who is fallen in the ditch, you want them to be profitable. You're not just trying to stomp on them and throw some more mud on them and cover them up in the ditch. You're trying to pull them out of the ditch and restore them. John Stott says, "If we walked by the Spirit, we would love one another more. If we loved one another more, we would bear one another's burdens. If we bore one another's burdens, we would not shrink from seeking to restore a brother who has fallen into sin." Further, if we obeyed this apostolic instruction as we should, such unkind gossip would be avoided, more serious backsliding prevented, the good of the church advanced, the name of Christ glorified. Then Kenneth Wiest, a Greek scholar, in his word studies, said this would restore such a one to his previous communion or fellowship with the Lord Jesus, which communion had been interrupted by the entrance of sin into the life. Thus the Christian brother would be repaired and again fitted out in his Christian life in two respects. First, he would be restored to his former method of living his life, namely independence upon the Spirit. And second, he would be restored with this fellowship with the Lord Jesus. So again, the word restore was used to describe mending a broken bone or a broken net. And when the disciples, James and John, were met by the Lord, or what I guess it was Peter and Andrew, it says they were mending their nets. They were fixing the holes. They were doing the painstaking work of repair so that it would be helpful again. And this actually strengthens relationships. So what are some ways that restoring a fellowship can actually make a relationship better than it was before the conflict occurred? So you've had a conflict, you've repaired the conflict. How can that make this relationship stronger? Think about that, yeah.
If I've had a conflict and it got restored, it makes me not make sure that it doesn't happen again because it's too hard to get it back or.
Good. I don't want to go through that again, so I'm going to work harder from here on out to make sure that doesn't happen again. Good. So we've got effort into this relationship. Good.
I think that strengthens your trust in the person's willingness to even engage in restoring.
Good. We've both shown that we want to restore this thing, that this relationship is important enough to work on. So our trust grows. Good. So a commitment to make it work grows, and then our trust with each other grows. I'll also mention this. Often in conflicts, we are clearing out trash. There was trash that was getting in between you in this relationship. And we're clearing it out and we're dumping it. And now, hopefully in the future, we won't bring that trash back in. So it'll be easier in the future with this relationship. We have a closer relationship because the trash is out of the way. Understanding of how sin affects a relationship. We understand that better after we've worked our way through it. We understand each other better. That's kind of adding to what both Linda and Tony said about really trust factors and commitment factors. Okay, letter D, recognize the problem exists in the first place. Husbands, I think, often are the ones guilty of this. We're just totally oblivious that there's a problem. And what problem? And she's been stomping around here for the last 10 minutes. And, I didn't realize there was a problem. And we're just it's just like this. We just don't see anything. So just recognizing that there's a problem to begin with is very important. Finances, understanding how each other thinks and what each other's fearful of and what each other's goals are. And sometimes, often, we get even a year or 2 or 3 into a problem where we don't even realize that we're thinking different directions financially. Children and childcare, child raising, making disciples of our children. Often there are 2 or more different viewpoints. How can there be more than 2 different viewpoints about how to raise your children when there's just 2 of you? Well, because we're pulling along our parents' views too. And we're sucking those into this marriage. And we've got all sorts of different ideas and we don't even realize we're not together on it. Sharing your responsibilities. Whose job was that to wash the dishes? And so I got home Thursday evening and Betsy had just gotten home Thursday evening. And by the time I got home, the kitchen was quite a mess. And neither of us felt like doing anything. So in the morning, I got up Friday morning and there's a little sticky note. Don't worry about the dishes. We'll take care of those later. Okay, so that clarifies what is expected of me. That didn't mean that I shouldn't just wash the dishes, but it did clarify what was expected. And that helps to head off conflict in the future, doesn't it? Where we're talking about these things. Okay, so that was number one, just introductory types of themes. We've come to the place where we know there's a problem. We've looked in the mirror, we've dealt with our side first. We value this relationship enough, we're going to do something about it. Roman numeral number 2, avoid the wrong extremes in this problem. 2 wrong extremes. One is just give in to it. Just don't do anything about it. Another would be to ignore the problem. And a third would be to try to be the winner in this conflict. I'm going to solve this thing, and I'm going to get through this conflict, and I'm going to get my way in this. And this happens with children that get more and more violent, for instance. This happens when husband, wife, one of them says, I'm going to win. And it sometimes goes really sour. But the first one, letter A, is to give in to the person without seeking to resolve the conflict. You're not even going to put any effort into it. Definition of this is it's used by the person who would rather give in to a wrong solution than to seek to resolve the conflict in a biblical fashion. One illustration of this, and there's balances to this, but the person who says, I would rather have our relationship and be right in our relationship than to be right in this problem. You may have that view of I want to be right in this relationship and be trying to solve the problem, or you may wind up just giving in over and over and over again and not even trying to sort through the problem itself. An example that I give, there are others I'm sure, but is Eli the priest. His sons were wicked sons. He was supposed to be raising sons who would be priests and who would be godly priests. He raised sons that were priests, but they were wicked. And the story is in chapter 3 of 1 Samuel. The Lord said to Samuel, behold, I'm about to do a thing in Israel at which both ears of everyone who hears it will tingle. In that day I will carry out against Eli all that I have spoken concerning his house from beginning to end. For I have told him, I'm about to judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knew, because his sons brought a curse on themselves, and he did not rebuke them. So the point is that Eli saw what his sons were doing. He saw there was a conflict, and he didn't do anything about it. He didn't rebuke them for it. There's other stories you could look at. One is King David with his son Adonijah and the wickedness there, and David didn't correct his son. So we want to correct problems. So giving in, just letting the person get away with it, isn't a good solution. So question is, how would the following verses help motivate us to avoid the extreme of simply giving in when problems arise? 2 Corinthians 5:10 says, we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that each one may be recompensed for his deeds in the body according to what he has done, whether good or bad. And Proverbs 27:6, faithful are the wounds of a friend, deceitful are the kisses of an enemy. So one is we have to answer to Christ. The other is a friend actually can wound a friend in trying to help them rather than being deceitful and just kissing and saying everything's fine. So how does that help motivate us, either of those, to solve a problem when we see one?
It doesn't just affect me.
Okay, so this problem doesn't just affect me, it affects the other person. Okay, what else? I mean, half of 2 Corinthians 5:10 is that I have to answer to God for how I'm acting in this conflict. The other half of it is they have to answer to God for how they are acting in this conflict. I want to be able to answer to God with a clear conscience and with everything solved, but I want to love them enough so that they are ready to stand and face God as well. Another side of that is we should want others to help us do our best. It's possible in this conflict, I'm going to have things pointed out in my life that I'm not doing correctly. I want to correct those, so I want to allow the other person the opportunity to speak into my life. And I want to help others do their best as well. And I don't want to, kiss somebody on the cheek and as if everything's fine when everything is not fine. I want to solve things, even if it requires doing careful surgery, getting the speck out of their eye. Okay, number 2 here under letter A, we don't want to give in. Proverbs 29:25 says, "The fear of man brings a snare. He who trusts in the Lord will be exalted." The fear of man brings a snare. Besides that, what are other possible wrong motives that a person might have for just giving in a conflict? So I'm not willing to solve this conflict. I'm just going to give in and let you have your way. What might be some reasons that we might do that? Just give in. Yeah.
We just don't want a confrontation, so let's ignore it.
Yeah, we don't want a confrontation. And sometimes we put this, I want peace at any cost. And sometimes when we want peace at any cost, sometimes the cost is the sin of somebody else. Somebody else might be sinning actively, but because I don't want the conflict, I'm willing to let them continue sinning. That doesn't show very much love on my part, does it? Okay, anything else?
The timing of the conflict.
What's that? The timing of it? Yeah. There are times, we'll get to this a little bit later. Sometimes it isn't the right time to deal with this, but that doesn't necessarily mean we're giving in. It means we're pausing until the right time to deal with it. But it doesn't necessarily mean we're giving in and just letting this go. So good.
Afraid of what the other one will think of me, or insecurity. Oh, they won't
Yeah.
love me. They won't.
Yeah. So the fear of man expressing itself through what will they think of me? How will they respond to me? There was another one you. Yeah. Yeah. Totally went over my head. Betsy had another point there. But where fear comes in.
They won't love me.
Yeah, they might not love me. They might think less of me. They might cut me off from their lives. Okay, that was letter A, giving in. A second problem would be ignoring the problem, letter B. Pretending the problem doesn't exist at all, or responding in a way that fails to focus on a biblical solution. This goes all the way back to Adam and Eve. Think about how they solved the problem in the garden when they sinned. They went and hid. They just tried to cover it up. So that's one way you could ignore it, is to try to cover up the problem. Let's just make some fig leaves here and cover ourselves up with it. We might do that by lying today. You might lie about the situation. You might hide the results of the situation, sweep it under the rug. If you want illustrations, just think about children and how they respond. You break the lamp, you hide it, and hope mom doesn't figure out that the lamp isn't there anymore. You break mom's favorite mug, and you just throw it away and hope she doesn't notice. They always notice. Why is it we think we can hide it? Or we'll lie about it. Oh no, that was my brother that did that. Or my friend came over and he did that. There's a lot of different ways that we might try to cover up a problem. Another way that we could do it is try to run from the problem. And this is also in Genesis 3 with Adam and Eve, where they not only sowed fig leaves, but they went and hid. They ran away. There are a lot of different levels of running away. Think of this arch again that I just briefly referred to. This is Peacemaker's picture illustration, where you start in the top where you're resolving it. The further you go towards attacking the other person, if you attack the other person, if you go far enough, you'll kill them. But if you go far enough absorbing it yourself or running from the problem, the extreme of that is suicide, where you actually kill yourself to solve the problem. But there's different levels of that. And as you're running away from the problem, there's increasingly horrid results that come from that. How might somebody run from a conflict, run from a problem?
Avoid the person completely.
Just avoid them completely? One little story. Betsy's family growing up had a neighbor. I think this is generic enough, we won't give it away. But the husband would be out there sitting in his driveway, pulling plants out of the cracks in his driveway. Anything but go in the house, right? We sometimes talk about the doghouse, but you go and you work in the garage. You go and work in the woodworking shop. You don't come home from work. You work overtime. Now, there are times when you work overtime to accomplish the purposes of the family, of your marriage. Sometimes that happens. But that is one way that sometimes guys run from problems. Other ways, TV, yeah. In today's world, you pull out your phone, you spend time on your social media. Books. Let me mention this one. I think you see, you throw money at it. You buy your kids more toys. I need to be careful saying this. You buy flowers. So now Betsy's thinking back. Okay, so
Yeah, I was gonna say.
there was flowers on the table when I got home. So what problem was Dan trying to hide from here? Run from. Okay. And ultimately, sometimes in a marriage, divorce, or the last few years, we can think of domestic violence that has taken place, where there's been people hurt very badly or even killed in trying to run from their problem. So they could cover up the problem, they could try to run from the problem, or they make excuses. And that's, Adam and Eve were master at all three of these. Look, it was the serpent's fault. Well, no, it was my wife's fault. Well, no, God, it was the wife you gave me. It's your fault, God. You gave me that wife. So there's a way that we could make excuses. In today's world, God made me this way. Have you heard that? God created me this way. Oh, so it's all God's fault that you're not obeying him. Is my medication. You know, I was on Benadryl, and it was my job. My job made me do it. My boss made me do it. The dog. There's you go downhill through the kids, and then to the dog, and then the cat. And, it's obviously somebody's fault, not mine. So those are ways. And then the ultimate attempt is blame shifting, not just making excuses. That's right, the excuses were I was afraid, I'm sorry. was I was afraid, and then the ultimate is to blame shift, blame somebody else for it. I'm a good person. It can't be my fault. So must be the other person's the bad person, since I can't possibly be to blame here. So in the long run, what are some possible implications in the following areas of attempting to ignore a problem? So you're trying to ignore a problem in, say, child rearing or finances or communication or marriage relationship. So four areas: child rearing, finances, communication, marriage relationship. In the long run, what are some possible implications? What might happen if we ignore this problem?
Child is selfish.
Yeah, you
Thinks
can wind
life
up
is all about them.
with selfish children. You can wind up with children that just learn how to manipulate the people in their lives to get what they want. So if they have to manipulate mom today, it's mom that they work on. If they have to manipulate dad today, it's dad that they work on, rather than teaching them proper submission to God and authorities.
That's quite a bit of what my job is fueled by. Is not all of them, but there are a few of them that are fueled there because we have learned to be master manipulators, to be cruel and all that at a young age.
Right.
You know, it's not-
And what's interesting is often parents are not parenting well. And rather than dive in and try to solve their parenting, it's now the school's fault, because they ignored the problem. Now it's somebody else's fault. So there's several things there. Finances, and we could go on and on there. Only got a few minutes. Letter C, trying to be the winner in the conflict. I'm going to win this argument at all costs. I'm not necessarily looking for a biblical solution. I just want to prove to you that I am right. In the Bible, there were classes of people that were like this. The one that comes to your mind first would be the Pharisees. They had to make it look like they were right, even though their hearts were so upside down and backwards. Some ways a person who seeks to be the winner will act or think: they're unloving, they're unkind, they're harsh, they're arrogant. There's a lot of different ways that they might display themselves. And then the person who tries to be the winner, the person who thinks he must be right. Proverbs 16:18 says, "Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall." Often this person who wins this argument just crashes even more violently in the future. They stepped on everybody else to get up the ladder, and then they've crashed even more violently. Proverbs 18:12 says, "Before destruction, the heart of a man is haughty, but humility goes before honor." Destruction is coming someday for the person who just thinks they have to win this argument. And there's times when this may be a time when we may not give in, but when we may say, this battle is not worth fighting at this time. What Deb was trying to get to, the timing of the conflict. I'm not going to fight this battle right now. I want to look at the top of the next page just to think about it in relationship to what we've been at so far. And it's just a chart. And notice across the top is the risk. You can have low risk as you enter a conflict. You can have high risk as you enter a conflict. But then you can have a low view of the relationship. You don't value it very much. Or you can have a high view of the relationship. You really value this relationship. Well, what happens there up in the left corner you don't want to risk anything, but you value the relationship a lot. Sometimes you just give in. And that isn't always the best thing to do, but you're not willing to take a risk to try to solve this relationship, but yet you don't want to break it. I don't want them to take the child from my house. I don't want to give Betsy the opportunity to think, maybe I should leave this marriage. So I just give in, and I give in and give in. Often that just makes matters worse over the long run. But it's a low-risk approach. Notice the low view of the relationship. You can either ignore the problem, and that is really a high risk when you're running away from problems and just not trying to do anything with them. There are serious problems coming in this relationship if that's what you do. But you're thinking in your mind that this is low risk, that you don't have to take much. But then the winner, he's willing to put everything he has into winning this argument. But it shows that they have a very low view of the relationship. What is high view of the relationship and high risk? It's actually diving in and trying to solve this thing. I am willing to do what it takes to work with you until we get this solved. So it's high view of relationship, but high involvement and possibly high risk. Does that make sense to you? That kind of a visual of how we approach this. Okay, it's 10:30, so we'll pick up with Roman numeral number 3 next week.